Georgie, good to see you again. Thank you so much for doing this again. The reason is I reach out to you because of the videos that I've done so far in doing interviews. Reading the comments, people were like, "You need to bring Georgie again." Uh, you were like really popular, the topic that we discussed at that time.
Thank you.
And one thing that I appreciate of you is that you are such a wealth of information, not just in health, but every time I hear you talking in interviews, I think that you're like to me, the classical philosopher that is very open-minded, and it comes with an objective approach to things, which I really, really appreciate, because you don't have an ideology that you're trying to protect at all costs, you know.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to today explore how we move into the future in an abundant way, because I think like the message that we're getting mostly right now is that we have to change our ways. We have to do this degrowth and really forget about abundance in the future. We have to radically change things in a negative way, I would say. Right. You know, that's the connotation. And I've heard you before saying that the planet is abundant and there's plenty of resources, and maybe I like that spin, you know. And that's the thing I want to explore with you today. So thank you, Georgie, again for being here today. I'm excited to throw at you some cool questions. And for those who don't know, Georgie he's also like a nutritional researcher, and you have a project, right? Yeah. I'm gonna leave the link below in the description. It's your company that has like nutritional and cosmetic products, right? It's ideallabsdc.com.
Yes, thank you.
So first question, can we have a future in which we continue with a good standard of living, or we really need to just go back, you know, just go back and start like being cold in the winter, basically?
Well, I think that's what the elite people want us to be. But I think if you look at the resources and the availability and what can be produced and what can the earth can sustain, I think as we mentioned in the last podcast, 10 billion people can be easily sustained, even with the current, inefficient technologies for producing food and fuel, and those improve all the time. So the whole spiel that we have 8 billion now, the world population is exploding, we need to slash the population down by at least 50%, we don't have enough resources, all of this is a complete provable lie, or at the very least it's the people that are speaking it that they have not looked at the evidence, but I believe they have. It's simply what they really mean is that at the rate of the profits that they want to keep for themselves, we really cannot continue with the current system, because the current system is currently overloaded with debt, both private and public. And the way the economy is structured, and the way things are set up for the middle class is basically we cannot claw ourselves out of the debt that we've put ourselves in, simply because the majority of the productivity of our labor goes up to the top 0.1%. So yes, in the current system, if these things continue, eventually you're going to see a complete destruction of the middle class and basically the immiseration and the impoverishment of many people. But it's only because the way things are set up right now in terms of the flow of capital and who gets the most out of, let's say, every dollar produced in value, currently the way this is set up is that the very rich people get most of it. In addition to that, the Western world has mostly deindustrialized. If you look at 50 years ago, most of the Western advanced economies were actually industrial capitalist countries. They were producing things, they were exporting things, or just producing things for internal use. But they were basically producing physical, objects of great value. Some of them were, producing food. In the United States is one such country, but most of the Western countries were basically what we call industrial capitalism. And over the last 50 years, what happened is that through the outsourcing of a lot of this industrial base to cheaper labor countries, basically, the all of these jobs that were good and that were present and were able to sustain a 4 or 5 person family with a single job, right? A person in the 1950s or 1960s in the U.S., a single working adult, even at a relatively unsophisticated job, such as working in a restaurant or McDonald's, or even like a car mechanic, was actually able to support a family of 5 and have multiple cars, sometimes even more than one
Hmm.
house, was able to save for retirement and put their kids through college if they wanted to or not. And all of this is now gone. Simply because the financialization of the economy eventually basically creates this parasitic sector called finance, insurance, and real estate. And all they do is they pump up the values of the assets because that's where most of the money is.
Hmm.
And the reason this sector grew out is because of the deindustrialization. When you move your productive base outside of the country, then all of these people that used to be employed are basically becoming what the World Economic Forum now is calling them useless eaters, because they don't really have much to do. I mean, you can try to create a service economy, and I think the United States did try to do that. Many Western countries try to do that, but eventually you realize that in an economy like that, first of all, you're very dependent on globalization because you've outsourced most of your production to be outside,
Hmm.
so often to countries that are hostile to you, or at least they're not friendly. They can pull the plug. China can stop exporting all of these electronics that or the entire world depends on.
Hmm.
So what happened is basically after the industrial base was moved out of the country, then the only things that remained were basic speculation with assets, and the companies that seem to be doing best in such an environment are the financial companies, including the banks, right, insurance and real estate. And if you look at that sector, you will see that this sector has been responsible for the vast majority of the GDP growth, if we can even call it real, over the last 30 to 40 years. Everything else has been basically either flat or negative.
Hmm.
Um, and this sector, it cannot employ that many people. The reason the elite likes this sector is because you can achieve a lot of profit with very few people, and
Hmm.
ultimately, basically, every person that you keep on the payroll is an expense. And in a profit-oriented
Right.
economy, you want to limit the expenses, and you can do this because a lot of the financialization is done by computer. I mean, there
Right.
are hedge funds out there that basically have one or two people managing multi-billion-dollar trading systems that run mostly on algorithms, and just
Right.
every once in a while a person will intervene
And
briefly.
and that can be a good thing maybe in the future. We'll talk
Yeah.
about it in a few minutes with IE, and really this what some people call bullshit jobs. There are so many jobs that really are unnecessary. Why not have machines do it, right? But going back to the beginning of uh, your talk here, you said like there are unlimited resources. Like, do you have information on these, more research? Because people hear that is like, what do you mean? Are you talking about oil, or
Yeah.
what type of resources are we talking about here?
Well, specifically oil. The whole thing about peak oil. This is a complete lie. And the reason and now several large countries have already realized that it's a lie. In fact, the entire Russian oil harvesting and production is based on the theory of so-called abiogenesis. In other words, that the fossil fuels is something that basically the earth creates itself from carbon at extreme depths where there's extreme pressure and temperature. It does not depend. It's not something that was based on decaying organic matter of animals or plants that lived millions of years ago, and now we're just depleting these resources. There's plenty of oil to go around, even for 10 billion people. However, when you exploit oil and you enter it into the economy, I mean, basically the energy that comes from oil, whenever you have a lot of energy, if it gets distributed and people are given access to it, you're going to have a very robust middle class, which favors industrial economy. In other words, people being employed in jobs that make things. However, the rate of profit of such an economy is not as high for the elite as the rate of profit of a fully financialized economy. So what they're saying now is that okay, they kind of came up with the argument of first of all it was global warming. I don't know if you remember like when it
It
first
used to be
started.
global warming, now climate change,
Now
which
it's
to
climate
me, the
change.
climate always changes. So what
Of
is
course,
this?
yeah. Well, there you go. So they created something that cannot be actually argued with. You cannot disprove it because there's always climate change. But if you look at the some of the earlier studies that were done in the 1940s and 1950s, they were saying that basically that it's instead of a global warming, it's actually global cooling
Hmm.
coming to us, and in the form of a mini ice age. So if the fossil fuels are producing global warming, and in fact we're getting like a mini ice age coming, then if anything, we should be burning more fossil fuels to warm up the earth, right, and to keep it plentiful and habitable. In addition, the carbon dioxide is the food of most of the plants. So there's really like once you start getting into these arguments, you'll see that you'll either be shut down, or they'll come back and say, look. we've given up on the. We're no longer arguing that it's global warming. We're just saying that the climate is getting extreme, and that there is some truth to that. But I can send you official studies and publications by the U.S. Department of Defense that they were basically able to mess with the climate and use it for war purposes as early as the Vietnam War.
With the climate, you mean?
Yes, with the climate.
Change the climate, right?
Change the climate. Yeah, it will for war purposes.
I know they can absolutely. I know these. They can change the formation of clouds. They can prevent the formation of clouds, for example.
But they can create. I mean, if you look at it's actually a report that was published on the U.S. Air Force website. It was called "Owning the Weather in 2025." Climate is a global military multiplier of the force multiplier. In other words, maybe the future wars, you don't need an army, right? I mean, you can, if I can create a massive tornado that's the size of like I don't know, of Mongolia, and it goes sweeps through the country and destroys everything in its path, then that's how you win the war. You don't need soldiers, right? So if they were able to do some of that as early as the early 1970s, imagine how much more the technology will be advanced today.
So,
so what I'm saying is that basically, yes, there is some evidence that the climate is becoming more extreme, but there is no evidence that this is any evidence actually is conclusive that this is tied in any way to the use of fossil fuels. However, the use of fossil fuels and the use of nuclear energy, in general, the use of energy-dense sources of energy, is what really has allowed this advanced civilization that we currently have to form. If we're going to go back to completely renewable sources of energy, such as solar or wind and whatnot, they're very, very inefficient. You cannot transport the energy very far because there's a lot of loss. And so usually what you have is basically if you have like a city or a town getting all of their energy from renewable sources, first they're going to get a lot less than what they could from nuclear and fossil fuels. And second, is basically it's very unreliable, right? I mean, you can have like a week of no sun, or at least like cloudy weather, right? You can have like prolonged periods of no wind. You can have all these. You're at the mercy of the climate, right? And you cannot really have. I mean, in order to have an economy and civilization, you need predictability. In other words, I need to know that I'll be able to eat today and tomorrow and a week from tomorrow. If all of this is up in the air, nobody will be willing to participate in any civilization. Everybody will be fighting for survival. And it looks like that's what the elite is really gunning for. They want us to go back to basically a level where, if right now we need let's say X amount of energy in order to maintain our standard of life, but that usage of energy is not really generating the profits anymore that the elite needs, then the elite says, okay, we're going to use the climate change as an excuse, and we're going to force everybody to use a lot less energy, let's say 1/10 of X, because that's really that's the comparison. That's the ratio of what the renewable energy sources can produce compared to fossil fuels and nuclear. And with that level of energy consumption and production, you cannot really have this advanced society that we have right now, which means if you have a car, and let's say it will be electric, they're pushing for that already, you'll be able to drive 50 to 100 miles at most. And basically, if you're living in a house, this means the temperature will not be as well regulated. It means, in the summer will be a lot hotter, in the winter will be a lot colder. It also means the production of food will be drastically affected. People don't realize how much energy goes into the production of the food that we're eating on a daily basis. And because in a city, you can't really have everybody farm, right? That's the whole point. The city is a very high population density area, which relies on external sources for food. So if you have situations like that, then all of these people will have to agree to eat a lot, less energy dense food, and the only thing that can be produced in such amounts cheaply enough so that the elite can make profit, or just a corporation that can make profit, is usually grain cultures, right? We're talking about soy, we're talking about wheat, we're talking about barley, we're talking about corn, especially corn. It has been subsidized in the Western.
And they're pushing for these things as well.
Yeah. So it means basically that what we're being told is that because of the climate change, which apparently we are changing, we are contributing to, or we're driving because of our energy use, right? Now they're saying we're destroying the planet, and we need to scale back our consumption, especially of energy, but it translates to everything else, because everything that civilization does and is depends on energy. If they cannot extract sufficient energy, then all these social structures in these large countries and this large network of things, it all collapses. It will become very decentralized and very sort of like almost rural, right? We're going back to a situation where it will be almost feudalism.
Yep.
And it works very well to the taste of the people that are running the show, because they're saying, okay, look, in a situation like that, it'll be very difficult to survive. Now, if you people are willing to accept what we propose, then we can take care of your needs. We'll give you universal basic income, but you'll have to agree that you'll eat these crappy things that we produce, because we decided we have to produce them, and we cannot allow you to farm. We cannot allow you to do all of these energy intensive things because you're harming the planet. And that's the agenda that's being pushed left and right. No matter where you go, the message is always, it's humans that are destroying the planet through their behavior. What's their behavior? Consuming too much energy, consuming too much food, polluting too much through the usage of these fossil fuels, right? So all of these things, they want them to scale down. But what they are not telling you is that if you scale them down by, let's say, 90%, that's why I said 1/10 of X, then all of this around you that we see right now is a complex, large city network. And almost like all of the advances of civilization, most of these will disappear, or at least they will not be maintainable to the level of that of what we used to have before. You will no longer be able to go into the store and have access to 20 different types of milk. You'll no longer be, if you even have milk, you won't go to the store.
Probably no milk allowed.
Yeah, no milk allowed.
Of the cows.
So you'll go to the store and basically you'll have access to mostly plant-based products, and even those. They will probably come up with an argument of how exactly they want you to consume and how much, and so this digital currency that's coming up, that's a big part of it, is to be able to control what you buy, how much, and where, and it comes down to basically complete control of the population, and in return, so they're saying, look, we are asking you to give up all of your freedoms. In return, you don't have to work, you don't have to basically toil in this brutal system that we currently have, and many people will agree that currently they're working too much and they're not getting as much money as their parents were or their grandparents were. So they're using this argument, but they're making the system on purpose to be like that, like I said, by deindustrializing. So they're saying, they're hoping the people will agree and say, yes, I agree, I'm a slave, I don't want to be a slave anymore, I don't want to be working. And they're going to come back to you and say, like, you will be just as big of a slave, if not even bigger, if you agree to what they're proposing. And what they're proposing is, like, they're saying, okay, you will no longer work. Okay, you can go home and basically sleep all day, do whatever you want. All you have to do is agree, right, that going forward, basically you'll be using many of the freedoms that you kind of taking for granted will go away, but we're going to take care of all of your needs. And unfortunately, I think many people are willing to go for that without realizing the price at which this comes. It's not only freedom, your quality of life will drastically decline. And they're not even hiding it. They're kind of saying, look, you will not own a car. I mean, remember that statement by the WEF founder? You will own nothing and you will be happy. Not many people are giving sufficient thought, I think, to what this really means, is that you will have absolutely nothing. And whatever it's coming to you in terms of food or any possessions or anything around you is going to be controlled by somebody else, not you.
Yeah. Yeah. There are so many nuances and so many good questions that come with this. I can hear like many of them, and the question is like, well, I was going to ask you if you think it's a Trojan horse, this whole like reset. Obviously you just said that yes, they just want to control our behavior, and also they play on the virtual signaling, that comes with like, we want to save the planet, we want to save humanity, and most people are good people, and they want to defend those things. And I don't like how they play with that. But there are so many arguments that to me are true as well. I mean, obviously, the way we're running things right now is very destructive for the planet, right? Not just like, aside from the carbon and all those things, which we can go back into that as well. But we're talking about the forest, biodiversity, and all these things. I mean, if we were to say, okay, let's continue using like oil, it's pretty destructive the way we're doing it right now. Maybe less so than 20 or 30 years ago, but we should be able to do it in a cleaner way, right?
Oh yeah,
do you agree with that, or do you just think like oil is just totally cool and they just keep burning oil?
No. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made for pollution. I don't have anything against that. In fact, so what I'm saying is that if we can go back, we can agree to go back to our way of life in the 1950s, which wasn't that bad, right? You still have a car, you have a TV, right? But a lot less electronics. Believe it or not, I mean that's the part really that one of the first things that got me suspicious of this whole Great
And less
Reset was that
plastic and junk, you
yes,
know.
yes, all of this junk that is now part of our life. Not only they're not going to take away, they're actually going to increase it through this Great Reset. Everything will be electronics. Everything will be plastic. Everything around you will be basically in some way or form tied to the internet and the digital culture. And that has already been proven to be really, really detrimental to human health and society and connections with other people. So that part, I mean, if they were proposing actually something good to replace the current system, of course I would listen. But the fact that the people who actually created this current mess are now telling you, "Hey, we have a solution. All you have to do is give us even more power than we currently have." To me, that's a very, very like a very big red sign. To me, it's like, okay, if you created a mess, not only am I not seeing any apology or like any admission of fault, you're actually doubling down on your insanity and saying, "No, yeah, the only reason I messed up is because I didn't have enough power. I need authoritarianism. I need full control of everybody, and then everything will be work perfectly fine." I think most sane people will say, "I don't think so." I don't like being
Yeah.
completely relinquishing control.
And I wouldn't have a problem with that if, looking back, we could say like, yeah, we totally trust these people. They make good decisions for us,
Yeah.
But all that we've seen in the 20th century and before is just wars, and governments are not like a group of people to trust, So moving forward, do I want to really trust these people, even though they are saying that they want to save the earth and the environment? I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
So right now, I hear you maybe saying like we have either the renewable energy path, which doesn't seem very sustainable, really, even though that is the goal, right? It doesn't produce enough energy to keep up with the standard of living that we want. And also we have the oil. Is there like a third path that we could follow? Is there something else?
Oh yeah,
Because
there's
obviously to me,
geothermal.
like even though like oil is maybe right now it burns and creates a lot of energy, but it's not a renewable really like resource. You're saying there's plenty to go around, but what we want is something that is in a way infinite, right? Like could be like the sun, or the wind, things like that. Even though maybe the output is not very good, is there like a third pathway here? Maybe.
Well, I think it's a mix. I mean, the immediate path forward, I think, is a mix. I don't think we can dump our fossil fuels and the nuclear energy, but it's mostly fossil fuels. Very few countries rely predominantly on nuclear energy. Maybe France is one of them. It's a good example. But so I don't think we should dump it completely immediately, because what the Great Reset people are not telling you is that if you do that, 50% of the people will probably die. There's just not going to be enough energy to go around to maintain all of these people that are basically living in subsistence. If suddenly tomorrow there's no food to go, no cheap food to go around, I mean, you're looking at the bottom 50% of society probably simply collapsing, or some kind of a large scale social unrest breaking out because they don't have anything to lose, right? So I think a mixture of both, with the gradual replacement of fossil fuels through improvement in technology. But one thing that I think, I mean, actually, if tomorrow you can get rid of most of the plastics and electronics in our lives, which are not really contributing much to our well-being, you actually drastically cut down on the usage of fossil fuels. But of course, nobody's talking about that. They're saying even more electronics is needed, right? Now it's like AI and whatnot. To me, this is just a recipe for disaster. I mean, the running of this massive electronics infrastructure, if you look at around the world, Bitcoin is a very good example. But in general, computer technology is actually just as bad. We're spending increasingly more energy on running this technological infrastructure, which actually at its core doesn't contribute much to our well-being. And what do I mean by well-being? I mean both health span and lifespan. In other words, if society is doing something that is not making me more healthy and or making me live longer, then I don't think this is something that society should pursue. And now when you take into account how much energy this thing consumes, probably a third of the entire energy that we consume, then if this goes away, or at least is drastically scaled down, then basically we can probably continue maintaining our lifestyle by using the fossil fuels and not changing anything, simply because a third of what we are using in terms of energy right now is basically wasted. We're producing these things, this infrastructure, this entity called the technological entity, if you want to call it, that doesn't contribute anything to us. I mean, may contribute to other people, like increase their wealth and whatnot. But you can probably survive without a cell phone. Most of the people that are over 30, they remember times when they weren't cell phones. They weren't even. They were basically there wasn't internet. There was only a phone at home, and even that was rare. We
Mhm.
survived, and we're actually healthier at those
Right.
times.
The problem is like, I mean, I see how we could and should have less junk in the house, right? Like less plastics. We could probably use different materials instead of plastic, wood and other things maybe that could be easier to recycle in the environment. But if you tell me like, yeah, we need to stop like digitizing the world and just go back to that, I just don't think that's possible. I think we're way past beyond that. Like people demand these things.
Yeah, but
They
why?
want it because right now we're having you on a like a conversation over Skype, and that is the only way we could have it.
And that's
We,
fine. And that's fine. But we don't need smart meters installed in the house. We
Mhm.
don't need like traffic video cameras with artificial intelligence. All of these things that they call the Internet of
Right.
Things. We
Hmm.
what we have right now is fine. But we don't need to create a city where everything is tracked and monitored by some kind of an electronic device, which is on 24/7. And not only we're going to consume a lot more energy, we're becoming a lot more vulnerable to sort of unpredictable events that nobody can control. Now, all of these electronic equipment, all of these electronic devices and the network that they create are very vulnerable to electromagnetic storms coming from the sun.
Hmm.
There were several big events. I think the most recent one was in Canada. I'm forgetting if it was like in the early 20th century or the 80s, where basically the entire state in Canada was completely wiped out. And keep in mind at the time there wasn't that many electronics going around, right?
Hmm.
So a very powerful pulse came from the sun and kind of wiped out an entire province for a week, right?
Yep.
Now imagine what happens if you're fully digitized. Let's say your key to the car depends on electronics; it's no longer mechanical. The key to your home is electronic. Your payment method into the store to buy food is electronic. If all of these things get suddenly wiped out through an unpredictable event, what happens? All that stands between society and chaos. This is a quote by Vladimir Lenin. All that it stands between society and chaos is three consecutive missing meals. Uh,
Yeah.
that's it. That's it. You do that,
Yeah.
and
And that's
basically
and that's where
hell
the
breaks loose.
universal basic income needs to come, because once we have more IE and more things, more jobs replaced, because that's gonna happen. People will need a way, to feed their families. And if they skip 3 meals, forget it. People are gonna go into the streets. But going back to what you're saying, like not only the solar flare could like create a chaos, like the government itself like could create it and say like,
Sure, sure.
we have this solar flare now and
Yeah.
everybody's gonna be in the dark for 3 days, or else. So that's maybe the fear that they can control more and more and more, and
I
and
mean,
these
yeah,
people are not to be trusted really, like based on history, right?
yeah. And I didn't want to call that I didn't want to say that the government can do that. All I was trying to, because some people don't like conspiracy theories. All I was trying to say is that you're becoming more vulnerable the more technologically advanced and dependent on technology you are. There's this
Yeah.
famous guy, the Unabomber. I think you've heard of him. He was sending. He published something. He got caught, I think, in 1997 or 1998. When I first came to the United States, there was this guy called the Unabomber. He was sending letters with bombs to several universities, and I think he
Yeah.
killed a few people. And they couldn't catch him for a while. And he said, "I'm going to stop bombing if you actually publish my manifesto, my life work." And they did. And he wrote some very interesting things. He said, "Look, once you create enough of technology, instead of you owning it, now it owns you. Now
Hmm.
you are dependent on the technology, and nobody can predict how technology will grow, and it's going to acquire a mind of its own." And he was saying these things before even artificial intelligence was available.
Hmm.
Um, and he's saying you will be, first of all, you'll be under control. Second of all, you'll be very, very dependent and vulnerable. And basically one glitch in this whole system, and let's say your entire bank account gets wiped out. One glitch in the system, you don't eat. One glitch in the system, you cannot access your medical records.
Yep.
Imagine running a hospital and you have to do these emergency surgeries, and suddenly, basically, like none of this
Hmm.
data is available because it's completely digitized. Now, so there needs to be a discussion on the cost of digitization to society.
Hmm.
I have
Which
not
nobody's
heard.
discussing,
Yeah,
like you,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm not.
Nobody's
Yeah,
talking
I'm
about
not
that.
saying that we should dump it. I'm saying that we need to discuss it as a society. What are the risks to over digitizing? And nobody's discussing that, right? That's really for me the biggest concern.
The problem again that I see with this is like the younger generation, I mean, they are playing video games, they are doing virtual reality. Like these kids, is just second nature to them. It's gonna be almost impossible to take it away from there or from them, or even to reduce. I mean, very, very hard. I think that's what people demand. And if people demand it and they are really clever, the way they have introduced this, I mean, it's going to be tough. But going back to, I don't know if you agree with this, but
Yeah, I'm saying we can stay at this current level and what the kids currently have. All I'm saying is that don't over digitize more, because the
yeah.
proposal of the Great Reset is to digitize everything, right? Every aspect of life. And I'm saying, okay, energy usage is going to go through the roof, right? And
Yeah.
what they're not telling you, but it's kind of implicit, is that well, it's going to come at the expense of your quality of lifestyle, right? And people are not being told that loud enough. If they were told loud enough, look, you can keep all of your gadgets, but you're going to be eating junk like for the rest of your life, and you will not be able to travel more than 20 miles, outside of your house, if you even have a house. I think then a lot of people will start thinking, is this really worth it, this trade-off, right? But right now they're not being told this. They're being told everything will be great, you'll be taken care of, everything will be fine, right? And people say, of course, give me more of, I mean, I like these gadgets, what's not to like? But they're not being told the cost of this. And the cost is you will not have a house, you will not have a car, you will not travel, you'll eat crappy food, and your health will be drastically reduced. You probably will not even be able to see a doctor anymore. Everything will be telemedicine. Perhaps you'll even be talking to an artificial intelligence robot who will basically be diagnosing you and prescribing drugs and potentially even doing surgery on you. People don't kind of think of these consequences and what this could mean for their life. If they're told explicitly, I think we're going to have a lot more pushback than what we currently have.
And the problem that I see is that when people start talking in these terms, like, no, we don't want that. We want more freedom. We want choice to have, to move anywhere we want. That now these people are right-wingers or conspiracy theorists, or they don't want to save the planet. They want to kill humanity. They are capitalists, blah, 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 And sure, some of them are that.
Right.
But other people are also just simply humans that recognize that, hey, to retain your own power in control of your own life, that's a good thing. To have the freedom of choice. And if you don't have that, like you said, like they can just do whatever they want with you. But they play this virtual signaling thing where, this is what it takes. This is what we need to do. We need to cut down. We need to allow them to tell us when to go, where to go, what to eat, and it's for our own good. And that's what really, like, I don't swallow that pill. I really don't. I want to save the planet. I want humanity. I want people to be free and happy and all those things, but not at my own expense. Don't take away my freedom. I was born free. Don't take it away from me.
I think if most people have not actually experienced some of the worst aspects of what's coming, and I think if they're all virtue signaling, because guess what? For many of them, the lockdowns and the pandemic and what was actually not that bad. They actually get to stay home for a while. They got paid for not working, right? And they think that that's how it's going to be when the full digitization scheme is implemented. It will not look anything like that. Yeah, you may not be working, but you will forget about leaving your house without permission. This electronic device you have to be carrying all the time. You have to ask for permission for just about anything. And the problem is it's going to be so remote and digitized that if you get denied your rights for whatever reason, they probably won't even be able to complain. There will be nobody to complain to. It will be an artificial intelligence robot. You have to go and present your case. And then if the algorithm denies you, there's no way to appeal. Who do you appeal to? You're entirely controlled by technology. I think after people start experiencing some of those true loss of freedoms, then they'll say, oh, no, that's not what I signed up for. The question is it going to be too late by that time? Because many of those virtue signalers, I saw them over the last couple of years, how they actually eventually changed. They said, some of them couldn't visit their relatives while they were dying because of the pandemic. Some of them were not even allowed to come back to their own countries, like Canadians, because they weren't vaccinated. And they said, no. If that's what it's going to look like, the future, then I don't care about universal basic income. I want to continue to work, because as long as my work is meaningful, right? They're saying, I don't have a problem with working, but make it so that my work matters. Right now, they feel that their work doesn't matter. And of course, when somebody nefarious comes along and says, hey, I have the solution, work is meaningless. Yes, we agree, right? And you're not producing much of value, just like you said, those useless jobs that we discussed earlier. Guess what? We're going to eliminate all of them, and you can go back to your house and not do anything, right? But of course, they're not saying the second part loud enough, which is like, but we're going to control every aspect of your life. Now, if people hear this loud, the second part, I think they'll be like, maybe they're not going to say no immediately, but they'll say they'll definitely have like a sort of like a second thought and be like, I think we need to discuss that, right?
I mean, again, to me, nothing is positive or negative by itself. It's like globalization or these great resets or even these AI options or even UBI. To me, it's how you use it, I have nothing against UBI. I would love to get some basic salary for just being a human, The problem is like when the people at the top pulling the strings are corrupted. And that's why I also talk so much about values and corruption and psychopaths and all these things. And, most people are good. We just need to use these things the right way. I remember studying in college, like globalization, and that looked so good to me, just have this global world and everybody's connected and going towards the same goals, but that turned into something else. And now globalization, maybe not a good thing. The Great Reset sounds fantastic on paper, but the people implementing it, these are people that do not want your good. They just want more control and power, and that's the problem, Same thing with UBI. I'm not against it. I think it could be great to free people from bullshit jobs, but it's how we use it. And the people that are actually implementing it. And I think corruption is something that we don't talk about enough, because corruption is what transforms something that could be really positive into something negative,
Yeah, it's just that I think people either ignoring it or like not listening careful enough to because the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum people, they're not lying to you. When they're saying UBI, people say, oh, UBI for everyone. And the World Economic Forum say, no, we can only afford UBI.
Only for you
exactly.
do these things.
And then the question is, okay, what about the rest? And the World Economic Forum is saying, you have to die. And that part, I think, is not being said explicit enough, or like people don't want to think about it. That's going to be them. They'll think, oh no, I'll be the one selected for UBI. You don't know. But to me, it's actually scary, because let's say, you think you'll be selected for UBI, but how do you know that in 10 years they're not going to change your mind and say, you know what, we need to do another half reduction of the population, and now you get selected for that. So it's like the fact that some people, a small group of people, will get absolute and total control over you, to me is scary, right? It should never be allowed, because power corrupts. This is a quote from Star Wars, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Is that quote from Star Wars?
From Yoda.
Or is it like another... I've heard that so many times, but is that actually from Star Wars?
No, I think it's like a rephrasement of a Greek philosopher way back in time. I think it was either Heraclitus or Democritus, one of the early philosophers. So
but it's a great quote, and it's true. And that's what we need to also, in my opinion, like work on our personal power in a positive way. I mean, not just to be like a dictator, but really work on like becoming good people, and tapping into our heart and tapping into the wisdom that we have to help others and these things, because that's what eventually will prevent from chaos and anarchy in a bad way, where you skip 3 meals and forget it. We have like people killing each other for a piece of something, right?
For toilet paper. Remember during the lockdowns, people were killing each other for toilet paper. That is tragic. We should not get to that level.
And that's because we see the neighbors and they are friends until we don't have toilet paper, and then forget it. It's war, So we need to step up. We need to become a better human beings to be able to handle the things that are going to come our way, no matter what. Otherwise, we're condemned to keep repeating wars and keep living in this crazy planet where we're still like killing each other for some basic stuff.
Yeah, and I think people need to get the message that if we move suddenly and completely away from fossil fuels towards completely renewable energy, these things will become unavoidable. Some kind of a very massive civil war or struggle will likely ensue, because simply there will not be enough energy to produce enough food to feed all of these people that are currently living in these Western societies. Yeah. And the implicit goal, by the way, the World Economic Forum is not even hiding it. They're saying, yes, we know that. but we have to, if we have two choices: either kill the planet, continuing what we're currently doing, right, or not kill the planet, which means going to the entirely renewable energy source. If we go entirely to the renewable energy resource, half of you will not survive. And they're saying if you don't want this to be done the ugly way, right, then give us absolute control. We're going to introduce digital currency. We're going to give you UBI, and basically over time, some people will kind of like will be weeded out, but in a more humane manner. Now they've already approved euthanasia in many
Yep.
Western countries. I don't know if you saw in Canada, even
Mhm.
kids are now eligible for euthanasia to choose by
Don't tell
themselves.
me that.
Yeah. Did you know that?
Kids eligible for
Kids.
like,
Yeah. So Canada came up with a definition, legal definition, which is called mature minor. And they're saying if a doctor and a psychiatrist examines a child and they determine these two people, which have an interest in killing the patient,
maybe
if
they get
they
a kickback or something.
of something, right? If they determine that the child is mature enough to make his or her own decisions, then the parent doesn't need to give consent. The child can say yes. I'm feeling down. I want to die. I mean, children are so immature. Their moods change all the time. It's so easy to find a child that says, I don't like life. I want to die, but they don't mean it. They just say these
Yeah,
things without
yeah,
meaning it.
yeah. They don't
But
know.
if
They're
a
depressed, anxious, whatever, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. But in the hands of a psychopath, this can be extremely destructive. And now Canada has already allowed it. They already euthanized several people for being homeless, for being mentally ill. And there is I'll send you the article, a really shocking article. Olympic champion, Canadian Olympic champion in the Paralympics. She's paralyzed, but she's really physically fit because I think she did it like in the running event, which is with the wheelchairs, right? The upper part of her body is remarkably fit, right? So she called the Canadian agency because she needed some kind of a wheelchair device installed, a wheelchair elevator installed in her house, so she can go with a wheelchair to the second floor. So she said she called the agency because she's eligible for government benefits to install this in her house. And she said instead of the agency sending these people to install the wheelchair, they sent two doctors and some social workers to try to convince her to submit to euthanasia.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she was
Unreal.
appalled. She said, "I didn't ask for that. Why are you sending these people to my house?" And they're saying,
Real.
"Well, your life sucks, basically. Like, don't you want to end it? It's such a burden." And she was terrified. She said, "Who told you that my life is a burden? Who are you to decide these things?" And she raised this, a lot of noise. Now it was all over the news. I think now there's going to be some kind of a lawsuit, but it's already on the books. This law is already there, and it's
Wow.
there in many Western countries: Belgium, Netherlands,
Yeah.
New Zealand. That's so. All of this infrastructure is being put in place to get it to a point where, they'll make it really easy for you to die in a humane way. And they're saying this is preferable to the mass riots and civil wars that we're gonna get if we don't do like the humane way. And they're saying one or the other. There's no avoiding of people dying because we're gonna move to completely renewable energies, which means drastically reduced, 90% reduced energy production. And they're saying the dying will come one way or another. Let's do it the humane way.
Wow. Just if you can send me that article and any other articles that you think are relevant to the conversation today, please, and I will put them on the description of the video. And going back to the energy issue, because to me that is the core of this matter.
Yes.
We have this dichotomy, right? It's like oil versus renewable energies. Now there's this maybe other alternative, which is technologies that have been suppressed. In my opinion, this is very likely actually. There is a guy called Dr. Stephen Greer. I don't know if you know him, but he's a guy that has been talking about UFOs for a couple of decades. And he says that since the 50s, 60s, perhaps, we've had these technologies that in a way are the closest thing to infinite energy, basically, right? But those are so suppressed because what they want is the powers to be is to have this dichotomy, right? It's like oil polluting the environment, killing planet, killing animals, blah, 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 or renewable energy, which is going to come with high price, a high label, But what is there is some technology that could really free up energy and create so much abundance that will give freedom, will be options to people, but they don't want that. So to me, that's really what we should be talking about much more. And really dig into like, is this true? Is this something somewhere in a lab in the United States or another country that they're creating energy like for nothing, for free? Because like quantum physics, I mean, the energy is there.
It's there, yeah.
Could we do like fusion maybe in a cheaper and safe way? Can we not? Like, that's what we should put our money and our resources. But that is not part of the conversation. And to me, that's a big red flag.
Did you see the news yesterday on CNN? Actually, on all of the news about the breakthrough in fusion they just achieved?
My dad sent me an article, something about, yeah, I think so. There was something going on, right? But
Yeah,
I
for
felt like,
the yesterday or the day before, they just achieved some kind of breakthrough that now the net energy gain from fusion at room temperature is much bigger, and now actually is justified to pursue it commercially. And that's huge, right? Because that's potentially unlimited energy. Yeah.
Right.
And it could be done a much safer way than fission, which is like the traditional nuclear plants, because they're much more likely to blow up and pollute the environment with radiation. So we do have that option. There's also the option of geothermal energy. A long time ago, I asked Ray about like what I said. Okay, so if he also agreed that burning fossil fuels is probably not the optimal way because we're polluting too much, right? So I said, okay, so what can countries do? He says, well, about 80% of the countries around the world are capable of basically producing enough energy from either geothermal or water. Like they have basically, there's a lot of water sources there. Latin America, you can probably you can go completely geothermal and water energy without the need for fossil fuels. There's plenty. There's volcanoes everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying, and it doesn't have to be every country. Not every country needs a volcano or a large dam in order to produce this water. I mean, if you have like something like Ecuador or like some of the northern countries of Latin America that have active volcanoes, they can produce a lot of energy, and that can be shipped, right? It will be losses, but if the energy is mostly produced for free, then it doesn't really matter, right? So it can be done. It's just not as financially beneficial for the private corporation. So the only thing it can be done is through some kind of a subsidy. And Ray said that the fact that the government has not produced these subsidies kind of tells you that they don't really want these options to be explored. So it's been suppressed. The solutions are there. It's just that we're being steered towards solutions that are beneficial to a very small number of people, and they have some very bad ideas about the future of humanity. Now, if the government can subsidize some of these natural resources, we could produce a lot more energy in a very clean way and maintain our current lifestyle, but it's just not what it will not generate as much profit as what the elite wants. The fourth industrial revolution, everything being driven by basically the AI and the humans becoming obsolete, that's the dream come true of the financialization economy, because then it achieve even more profit with even fewer humans, fewer humans to feed, and to them that is a dream come true. That's why they're pursuing this, and also allows a lot more control for a single person through the use of technology. Technology is just a multiplier. That's all it does. It's neither good nor bad. But in the hands of a bad person, it can destroy the world.
Exactly. Yeah. Speaking of Ray Peat, like I want to recognize Dr. Raymond Peat today, because he passed recently, I think in the month of November.
24th,
And he had so much positive contribution to not just health, but also, like you just mentioned, like his idea of like using thermal energy, which it's another like thing that the Venus Project, I don't know if you know the Venus Project, but they talk a lot about thermal energy, and yes, there are things that we can do right now. We don't even have to think about fusion, there are things that we have right now that we could tap into, but like you said, maybe those sources would not make as much money for the people that want to maximize their profits, and that's part of the problem. So thank you, Dr. P, for all your amazing work through decades. It's amazing how he was until the last minute doing like podcasts with you guys. Just like I feel like a couple of months ago he was doing something, or still it's just the very last minute he was educating the public and talking. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys for really given him like a place to talk, like a base to expand his ideas to other people. It's amazing. So talking a little bit about health, and then we can start getting towards the end of the dialogue today. What are the biggest red flags that you see with the health suggestions that we're getting these days? I'm starting to see them everywhere. Do this, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. Long term, what are the things that you would say to people to be careful with these and to maintain good health, physical, mental health?
So I'm starting to see a lot of pushback towards like a lot of the natural remedies that people have been having access to. Since the pandemic started, a lot of articles started coming out and say aspirin is dangerous. The risks outweigh the benefits. Same thing happened for vitamin D. I just recently saw an article about vitamin B3, niacinamide, saying it can cause cancer or it can make cancer worse. But then if you look at the actual study, that's not what it shows. They used a very specific mutant model of an animal, and they administered specific doses of one chemical. And even then, it wasn't clear. I mean, the tumor was already there, but it wasn't clear basically whether the control group or the B group actually had bigger tumors. The size difference was not very large. What I'm trying, I think the probably the
So
best.
natural remedies.
Yeah, the natural remedies, they're trying to start a wage war on them, and now there's a proposal in the U.S. to actually start regulating all of the dietary supplements as drugs, and they're saying we're going to by default prohibit all the dietary supplements, and if you want to sell a dietary supplement, you have to go through a very rigorous testing process for both safety and effectiveness. Now, this is the requirement usually for drugs, and now they're saying yes, but we are seeing this large industry that is selling a lot of these things, and they're hurting a lot of people, and they're hurting some people. But if you look at the number of people, because the FDA publishes a statistic, the number of people hurt by dietary supplements, if you assume that it's the dietary supplements that did it, it was something like 1,000th of the amount of people killed by lightning in the U.S. every year, right? So the government is trying to protect you from an event 1,000 times more rare than if you go outside and get struck by lightning.
I thought you were gonna compare it to pharmaceuticals, but not even that. You
No, not
just
even
like
that.
lightning, because
Oh
if you
no,
compare it to pharmaceuticals, it will be like, I don't know,
top third,
millions
top
of
third, yeah.
top
So
third cause
yeah,
of death in the
yeah.
United States, at least.
Yeah, it's basically they call them the iatrogenic deaths. In other words, deaths caused by doctors. It could be medicine, could be a procedure, right? But the medical system caused this death, and the CDC refuses to publish the number of these deaths and to recognize them. But Johns Hopkins University every year, I think, publishes a report on the estimated number of those deaths, and they're the third leading cause of death in the United States after cancer and cardiovascular disease. So your doctor is
Yeah.
many times more dangerous than the criminal on the street, many times more dangerous than a terrorist who may be thinking of attacking the country, many times more dangerous than, I don't know, than eating maybe even some kind of a poisonous food, or like taking a bad dietary supplement. But
Yep.
nobody discusses that. So I think what I'm trying to tell people is that watch out for these news articles, and basically whenever the mainstream media says that something is bad for you, try to like research the information for yourself, but using different search engines. Google now censors things, and not only censors, but it changes the rankings. So if you're looking for articles that say, is aspirin good or bad, because you can type this in Google, Google will actually will give priority to the articles that claim aspirin is bad for you. And then and then you have to go to page 3 or 4, and sometimes Google completely removes any contrarian article. It's complete censorship. But if you go to other search engines, you can use a couple of them. Then eventually you'll find articles by reputable doctors saying, no, it's not like that. Our evidence shows something else. So in my opinion, you should have the right to second opinion, including when it comes to searching for online information. So just because Google says something, or CDC says something, that doesn't make it true. Nothing is completely true or false in this world. It's all sliding scale.
Yeah, exactly. And many times also be careful with the research, because if you just read the title of it, and it could be very misleading. Sometimes there is research that is done purposely in the wrong way to prove a point, to prove like vitamin B3 is bad or whatever. So and that's what you do. You really dig into the article and recognize that, oh, wait a second, the design of this study is like faulty here. Like, we shouldn't really pay attention to these conclusions. So be careful with that.
Yeah. And very often, if you use different search engines, you'll find that other people like have actually looked at this article, and they're doctors. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is, like, do your research, but don't limit yourself to a single source, because now increasingly more censorship is basically widespread. And the powers that rule us, or at least want to rule us, they want you to get only one specific message from one specific approved source, and they don't want you to dig up any further. So Make sure you have access to things like probably some of the most widely protective substances are aspirin, vitamin D, the B vitamins, right? Pregnenolone could be another one, but it's a steroid. Many people don't want to use steroids. But just the aspirin, vitamin D, and the B vitamins by themselves can probably get you out of many situations that would normally medicine would treat as very serious, and they'll tell you need like a hospitalization.
Yeah, we're not gonna give names of diseases here to treat or anything, but it's true that it's crazy at the same time that something as simple and available at least until now, like aspirin, could really support metabolism in many different ways. And this is one that is an easy way. If you look it up, if you do some basic research, you're gonna be amazed, right?
Yeah. It is the evidence is there for everything. Anybody can if you're concerned about specific disease, you can type aspirin and then in space and then follow the name of the disease. More often than not, you're going to get articles showing that aspirin is beneficial. So search for yourself and always take what the official version is with a grain of salt. Never forget that the official version favors very small group of people who don't really have your best interest at their heart.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is true for most things. The one thing I want to say in terms of the aspirin is like the thing that they always mention is like it's bad for your stomach. It could cause this ulcer, that problem, whatever. That might be true for some people, but there are ways to take it that would not actually give to that problem. So you research ways, if that's your case, that you have like a stomach ache whenever you take it, there are ways that you can take it without causing the problem. How I approach like medicine these days, what I would tell people is like, if you have an emergency, just go to the hospital. I mean, they're the best at what they do. But for the other regular stuff, if it's just to suppress symptoms, just do your own research. There is no need to be chronically on a pill that they give you, because those things, those pills, those are pharmaceuticals. Those are the things that kill the most people. The third leading cause are those toxins. Those are toxins that, sure, maybe they prevent you from feeling the pain or prevent you from this or that. But if you are perpetually taking them, 2, 3, 4 of those things, anytime after you're like 30, like many people are already taking drugs for cholesterol and other stuff, it's like, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Do your own research, of course. I want to wrap it up here for 2 questions. The first one is like, are you positive about the future? Or are you what are you thinking?
I'm positive, but I think we're going to go through some kind of a cataclysm first. I'm positive simply because the system that this group wants to install is not stable. It's very, very highly complex and twisted, and it doesn't self-maintain. And if you look in life, the most stable things are always self-sufficient, right? They don't need much in terms of like constant tweaking and maintenance and whatnot. And humans are very good self-sufficient systems if you leave them alone, if you don't poison them, and if you don't oppress them, and if you don't create problems for them, right? The current system that is being built, like I said, the Unabomber saw this 30, 40 years ago when he was writing this manifesto. He said, we're building a system that will not only own us, but we're going to become slaves of it. And if the system can collapse like overnight in a matter of milliseconds, if we get hit by a solar storm, and there is nothing we can do to protect it. So the reason, again, because the system requires so much maintenance, is so energy intensive, right? Which we don't have the energy for. I think the system will collapse. And I think people also are waking up and realizing that a lot of these things that are being proposed are not good for them. And they're starting to question, why am I not being told of the risks, right? You're telling me about the benefits, but you're not telling me about the risks. If I go to the doctor, by law, the doctor is required to, not that they always do it, but they're required to tell you, okay, if you take this drug, right, we think it's the best drug for you, but guess what? There's some risks associated with it. I'm not hearing any kind of discussion like that in regards to the political systems and financial systems that are, being imposed on us. But people are noticing this and saying, wait a minute, I have to look more into this. If I'm asked to vote for something like that, I'm not going to agree. I'm also seeing a lot of people starting to become self-sufficient, more in the rural areas, but also in the cities. People that are living in the cities, they saw the shortages that happened during the lockdowns, and the more perceptive ones, I don't want to call them smarter, but the ones that are more perceptive said, That's not a good situation. If all that stands between society and chaos is 3 consecutive missing meals, then I need to make sure that I have
Yeah.
those 3 meals available, right? At least for a couple of days in advance. So they're starting to connect with rural farmers and people producing food out in like in the in the agrarian areas, or they're starting these farms themselves. Some people are leaving the city. Some people are saying the way things are organized, it's only going to become more complicated, more centralized, more digitized, and they're saying, I'm okay with what I have right now, but I don't think I can handle anymore. So they're moving out. One way or another, I think we're experiencing what I like to call the Great Awakening. The question is that the problem is that the people that currently control power, they're not willing to let us go like that. They want us to be in this system of like full control because they can use us to generate value for them at will, right? If you don't have freedom, and if your source if your food comes from the company you work for, let's put it this way, then you're probably going to be working hard because you don't want to be hungry, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are waking up. I think a lot of people are starting to take matters into their own hands. But I think that we may, unfortunately, we may experience like an event like some kind of a social unrest in a large city. I do. I think that's actually probably likely to happen in the next couple of months in the winter, not in the United States necessarily,
In Europe,
but
maybe.
yeah, exactly, yeah, Western Europe because of the war in Ukraine and all the refugees coming and the restrictions that the Europeans are now imposing on their own society. They're
Hmm.
saying starting to ration water, electricity, and food. Now, whenever you start
Yeah.
rationing things, people, even the ones that are virtue signaling before, even they cannot continue to lie to themselves that things are good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see what happens, but I think at some point, maybe one of the poorer European countries, we're going to see a breaking point where people have said, listen, we've been poor for so long, and now this is becoming even worse because of this
Yeah.
war that I
Hmm.
don't benefit from. I don't have anything against the Ukrainians or the Russians. I don't want to support this war. Why are you sending my money to support,
Yeah.
some kind of a war? And they're going to rise
Yeah.
up and say, no, we're going to remove this government, and we want to run things our way. So I think
Hmm.
that will probably happen in Europe. I
Yeah.
don't see like a large scale cataclysm, social upheaval happening in the United States for now.
Hmm.
Now, if they try to introduce digital currency completely
Yeah.
on people, and if this digital currency comes with a lot of strings attached, such as
Hmm.
you can buy one hamburger a month, one milk a month and
Oh
whatnot.
man, don't say that. That's
Yeah,
when the hamburgers in the United States only one a month. Like forget it. Social
yeah,
unrest.
yeah. So if that happens, then I think we're gonna see some response here. But I don't think it'll be violent. More like some of the states may try to secede. Some of the states will say,
Yeah.
um, they're already starting to create their own financial institutions. I don't know if you knew, but North Dakota, the state, is the only state that has its own government-owned bank. So they're actually independent of the Federal Reserve. They
Oh wow.
basically, yeah, but in order to get an account there, you have to be
Oh,
a resident or of North Dakota. But I think other states are looking into that. Florida is one such state, and California is another one. South Carolina, they're now saying West Virginia. They're saying, you know what? We don't like what the federal government and the people who control it are doing. We're going to create our own local things because all of these states they realize that all of the resources that they need for survival they already have them.
yeah.
So they're saying let's localize. Let's figure out how to create enough food and have enough energy for the people here to survive,
Hmm.
right? And they're saying, but because we're in a federation, our ability to finance things is affected by the federal government because they can devalue the currency, they can change it, right? So
Hmm.
let's create our own local financial system, and that's how actually it was in the United States before 1913,
Hmm.
before the Federal Reserve was
Yeah.
created, and it was created for a good reason. I mean, because there was a lot of these local banks that were completely fraudulent. They were creating their own money out of thin air, same as the FTX recently that happened, right?
Yeah.
Um, but if the central power is acting in a way that's interfering with people's survival or ability to live a good life, then the peaceful response, always is hyper localized.
Yeah.
Make sure you and your family and your neighbors are okay. You have enough food. You have enough energy. And then once the storm passes, we're gonna figure out whether you want to re-expand or do you want to stay local for a while until things
Yeah.
normalize.
You have
But
to
that,
reclaim
yeah,
the power. You have
yeah,
to reclaim your power. And that's why it's so important that we become self-sufficient. And it doesn't matter right, left, doesn't
yeah,
matter what type of political approach you have. Everybody should be doing these things. And I want to add one component that is very important also to that is networks, and
yeah,
this is why this is called cooperation paradigm, because in a way, that is the only solution that we have moving forward. Like, I can be self-sufficient on my own, maybe, but it's in the power of collaboration and cooperation with others when we can really like make things happen, at least at the local level, right?
Yeah.
And you can be the farmer, and you can, and I can provide this, and you know about that. And collaboration is huge when we all have put our differences away and say, hey, we want to become self-sufficient. We want to protect our families, our communities, and we can do it together. We really don't depend so much on federal things, and we need to reclaim that power.
Yeah.
I mean, we do, unfortunately, but we need to reclaim it. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
The good news is the resources are there. We're not. There's no shortage of resources, and I think that's the thing that scares the most the central power, is that they know that if people don't need the central power, people cannot be controlled, right? If you try to impose something, people say, you know what? I don't need your digital currency. I can have my own local here. I mean, if all my food is coming from my neighbors, why do I need to use a currency that's coming from 3,000 miles away, from people that don't really have my benefit, at my best interest at heart? I'm going to figure out something with my neighbors. Maybe we do barter. Maybe we do some kind of exchange, right? But and that's what the local state banks are going to be doing. They're going to provide people with currency to trade locally, right? But the good news is, the resources for survival are there. The only thing that we need to be aware of is that try to protect them from potentially, some kind of a central power trying to control them and usurp them. But I don't think that's possible, because they're so spread out. America is such a large country that I don't think you can control what people do locally in their daily lives every day, except if we allow the complete digitization of our lives, right? To the point where everything that we have is on our phone, and some algorithm thousands of miles away, we allow this algorithm to decide how we live. That should not happen. If we allow this, then the localization is not going to help much, because let's say you cannot get into your car. You cannot go into a store. You cannot do anything without, let's say, your phone allowing you to do it, right? You don't have the certificate, or some algorithm is deciding you're a bad person, right? If we get to that point, then it's bad for everybody. But I don't think people will allow it. People already started to ditch their phones. I went on Amazon. The most popular product sold over the last 3 months was what they call dumb phones. Remember the phones that were just you could just talk and text to them? Yeah. They're now coming back in vogue. And these old small Nokias, if you remember them, they were very popular.
Open them,
They're not very popular. People are saying, you know what? Maybe. I realized that my so-called smartphone is actually starting to control me completely.
It's too smart,
and I don't like that. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, here's the last question for you. So Albert Einstein, he said the most important decision is this: to decide if we live in a hostile universe or in a friendly universe. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that by default, the universe is neutral, but it tends a little bit towards good. And I've all the evil people that I know, that I met, are actually usually kind of stupid. And there's a good explanation for that. In fact, it's stupidity that actually sits at the core of evil. Evil people, sometimes they're abused, but that's usually small percentage of cases. Why is a stupid person eventually going to become evil? Well, the world is constantly changing, and every change requires an effort from you, or in expending energy in order to adapt. Now, if people who are stupid, stupidity is usually a sign of low energy production. So if you have low energy production, the world is constantly changing. Every change that requires you to adapt, you will view as a threat. You'll say, okay, I just created my strategy. I want to use this strategy and not change it. But guess what? The next day, the world is different. So now I have to modify my strategy. Yeah. So to people who are in low energetic state, which also tend to be not very smart, to them the world is a threat. Now, if the world is a threat, actually, if anything around you is you perceive as a threat, psychiatry has a very good theory, and actually I think it's valid. It says that eventually you will become violent towards that thing that's in your environment that's constantly stressing you out, right? Yeah. Usually the normal response is you run away, or you try to control that thing that's stressing you out. Well, you can't run away, and you don't have the energy to control it. So what do? You lash out, right? You're like, okay, so these people, the ones that are in low energy and they tend to be more stupid, eventually they tend to perceive everything around them as a threat. And the ones that are in a position of power, they say, okay, I have all this power, I'm going to control everything, right? The only way for me to feel safe and to feel okay is if I control everything. So they keep coming up with these bizarre, structures to keep everything under control. They think that if they establish the structure of full control, they finally will be free because nobody will be threatening them. That's false. I mean, they may maybe save for a few years, but ultimately this structure of full control collapses because the world likes to change all the time. That's just the basic feature of the world. So the world will be, you will perceive the world in a lot better light if you take care of your metabolism and you're surrounded by people that care about you and you care about them. In a situation like that, you will interpret a change as an opportunity for doing something new. If you're in a bad situation health-wise, or you don't have people that care about you, you don't care about anybody, then any change you'll interpret as an act of war, and
you're going to survival, and you want to defend or kill or whatever,
or attack, right? Exactly, or attack. Yeah. So yeah, to answer your question, I think Einstein. I would side on the side of good, but not extreme good. I think nature is neutral, but tends to help more than harm. The harmfulness usually comes from misperception of what the signal is from nature is, and then you're reacting in a negative way. If you look in nature, most animals live in peace most of the time. You know, there are brief periods of extreme trouble, such as if a predator is trying to eat the animal, right? So there are some cases of extreme bad stuff that can happen to you, but that's rare, right? I mean, if it wasn't rare, we probably wouldn't have life to start with.
Right.
The basic state of life is good and calm. There are unpredictable events that can harm us, but the way you prepare for those is not to live in constant fear and try to neutralize every threat, because you don't know all the threats. Some of them are unknown, right? The way you prepare for this is by being maximally adaptive, which means maintaining optimal energy production. In other words, be the best you can be so you can respond to the world in the best way, in the best possible way, even if it throws something at you that's not necessarily good for you.
Yeah, I love this last part, Georgi. Thank you so much. We have to stay healthy and strong. We have to collaborate. And the universe is perhaps tends towards a little bit on the positive, and it's true, like life thrives, right?
Yeah.
It facilitates like this growth.
Yep.
So these are really good wishes for the new year. Thank you so much, Georgi. That was so cool and amazing information. I appreciate that you took some time today to speak with me, and wish you all the best in the new year. And hopefully, I know we're having this trouble in the world, but I'm always positive. I think we'll see a lot of good things in the coming years.
Yeah, I think people are waking up. The Great Awakening is here. I'm only praying for so that war doesn't happen, because war can uproot everything. But if barring any serious war, I think we'll emerge stronger on the other side through this time of challenge.
Okay, Georgi, thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.